Hello, my friends. It's been a minute since I've filmed a video for this channel. I think the last time I filmed a video was maybe 2016. YouTube and BookTube have changed a lot in that time. And, you know, the world has changed a lot. I've changed a lot. My hair is a lot shorter from the last time I filmed a video, but it's a lot longer than it's been in months. But I was going back, for some reason, I think I was inspired. I went back and watched a bunch of my old videos. And I just thought it was so funny and amusing to watch a past version of myself when I was like, 18, 19, 20, making videos about books and getting so excited and passionate about the books I was reading that I just had to talk about them with somebody. My interests in literature have changed slightly from maybe the last time I made a video. One of the videos that I watched, my old videos, was a video where I talked about Asian American authors. And it's a little funny to me to look back on that video and look at all of the authors that I was really, really excited about. And I featured a lot of books in that video that I hadn't read, and I still haven't read, so I can't recommend them at all. I have no thoughts on them, but it's just funny to me to see how far I've come from that. Right now my interest is a lot in translated works, specifically from Korea, because that's where I've been for the past 3 years. So I did want to make a video today to talk about Korean literature. I have a hefty stack of books here from Korean authors. All of them translated. Yes, all of them are translated Korean works, and I think I want to just talk through them a little quickly and maybe just a list if you're interested in reading any Korean literature, if you don't know where to start, or if you want to talk about any of the books that you've read. If you've read any of these books, please let me know. And let's talk about Korean books. Oh, this is so exciting. The first book I have in this stack is one of the first that I read last year in 2021. And that's Kim Ji-young, born 1982, by Cho Nam-Joo. And one of the things I was thinking about while watching my old videos was that, do you remember when we used to just hold up books like this and just talk and make an 11-minute video about a book holding it like this? I think that's silly, but we're gonna do it anyway. Anyway, Kim Ji-young, born 1982. I read this book as part of a book club for Fulbright Lotus, which is a Fulbright alumni group focused for Asian Americans. There's a monthly book club. Love them over there. And this is the first book we read, and I read it in a single afternoon because I just really wanted to join this book club and talk with these people and meet them for the first time. And this book is an almost medical-like assessment of this woman's life, Kim Ji-young. And this is a pretty popular Korean translated work. And it follows her, the microaggressions that she faces as a woman living in Korea. And sometimes they're just short little things that happen to her, to how her mother treats her and her brother differently. But then sometimes it's really big things, like spy cameras are placed in her work. And for me, this was the most important thing in the book, because this is a paranoia that I've had before moving to Korea, and it was just exacerbated when I moved to Korea. But it's the idea of spy cams are just these little tiny cameras that are placed in public spaces where women or non-males are frequently undressing, perhaps a bathroom or a dressing room, or hotel rooms or love motels, and film them without their knowledge in this voyeuristic fetish that exists in Korea, and they sell it online and things. And it's terrifying. This happens to her at her work, and when I was reading it, it just felt so real. And I remember after I read it, I was with a friend and I went on a 40-minute like diatribe of spy cams and how this is a very real fear of mine and why it needs to be taken more seriously and why it's an issue, and like the Burning Sun scandal. It was a lot. It was a lot to unpack. Kim Ji-young, born 1982. Would recommend. Good book. Also recommended by Nam-Joo of BTS, so a glowing recommendation if I've ever heard one. The next book on this stack I have is Human X by Kang. I love this book. I think this is one of my favorite books that I read in 2021. I know I just said that about Kim Ji-young, born 1982, but this was actually my second Kang novel, and I don't have a physical copy of it with me. I left it in Korea. My friend needs to send it to me. This was a beautiful, beautiful book. It focuses on the Gwangju massacre, and the first chapter is told from the perspective of like a 14-year-old boy. He's a middle school boy, and it follows his perspective as like a young teenager living in Gwangju, not really understanding the severity of what's happening or like why his nation is attacking him and his community. If you haven't read the book, this isn't really a spoiler because they says it on the back of the book, but he ends up getting murdered. He ends up getting killed in a very devastating and tragic way, very sad. But the following chapters of the book follow each person in his life dealing with their grief on the personal level, juxtaposed with the grief of Gwangju as a city, and the continued silencing of their voices in provincial discrimination against the Jeollanam-do area. I wrote a review about this on my website, which I started also last year. But I said I wasn't going to go in depth. Maybe I should go a little bit faster. Please read my review on my website if you want more of my thoughts. I have some concerns about this translation by Deborah White. I think that's what her name is. Because I read an article in the New Yorker that she may have embellished some of the language. And while I think that it's a beautifully written book on its own, I do have some concerns about the translation being embellished, but I will move on. The next book on my list in this stack is To the Warm Horizon by Choi Jin-Young, translated by Soje. As a basic summary, post-apocalyptic pandemic world, and these two sisters are fleeing Korea, or what used to be Korea, across the Russian landscape, and they come across a caravan of another Korean family that's on the run. They're in Russia. It's really cold. They can't understand anyone else around them. One of the sisters is a young girl, and one of the rumors is that if you eat the livers of young children, you can be cured of the disease. And so that obviously poses a lot of danger for her and her little sister, the main character. And so she's on the run. She can't trust anybody, and somehow, in this caravan of Koreans, she meets a lovely young woman who she ends up falling in love with. And it's a story that's really, really good. I actually read this as part of a competition it was through the Literature Translation Institute of Korea. But the contest was the Korean Literature Review Contest. I did 2 submissions because I was just really excited about reading books. And I read this with my friend Safi, who I met in Korea. I picked this book because it centers on a lesbian romance, which I haven't seen in any of the Korean books that I've read so far. And essentially what this book is about is it's juxtaposing, what I got from the book is it's juxtaposing the values of the individual characters when society has basically crumbled. And so like, what do you hold dear? What do you value most in society? What do you want to maintain as a fundamental human value? And love. And I wrote a review on it on my website. Plug for my website. Okay, I'm gonna try and go faster. I'm so sorry. Okay, the next book is the most recent book that I read, and it's called One Left by Soom. Reading this romanization, but not actually seeing it in Korean, it looks like Soom, but that can't be it. right? Soom. This was the first book I read in 2022, and it was a doozy. I started reading it last year, and it's taken me so long to finish it because honestly, this is a really, really brutal book. Trigger warning right now for sexual slavery, rape, abuse, lots of things, lots of very graphic. This is a very hard book to read. It was hard for me to read. It was very graphic in violence. But to summarize, it is essentially an amalgamation of very real stories from Korean comfort women who were women, and most of them girls, teenagers, who were kidnapped or persuaded, manipulated into sexual slavery for Imperial Japan during the Pacific War. And this story follows one of the women who finds out that one of the comfort women is about to die, the last one. But the narrator of the book, or the main character, hasn't come forward that she is a comfort woman. So when the news is saying there's one left, we follow this woman who is processing her own trauma, but also who wants to come forward desperately, that especially to the one left, the last one, that she is not the last one, that someone will be alive to continue to tell her story and their story. And it's a really, really good book about the collective trauma of Korea after the Pacific War, and really like how this part of Korean history and Asian history, or East Asian history, is largely denied. Like Japan really is like, no, this didn't happen, and Korea's like, it totally did. Anyway, it's a really, really good book, really hard to read, but it's really, really important. I think that maybe I had some issues with some of the execution of the story, but I think that it's an important story to read. Maybe I should not talk about all these books, but I really want to. Next book is At Dusk by Hwang Sok-yong. This was the last book I read in 2021. But this is a book about a man who, for all intents and purposes, is very successful at his job. He's an architect, and he one day receives a mysterious note from a woman that he doesn't recognize. Essentially, she's passing along a message that a woman from his past would like to speak with him. We look into his progression and how he grew up in the slums, and how he grew up in a very poor neighborhood, and how there was one girl in his neighborhood who was also on a similar track as he was. That's like on academic success. She was going to school. He was going to school. They sort of had like a thing going on. They were kind of in love with each other. But then when he became successful and he really shunned his past life, he did not want anything to do with living in the slums anymore. He did not want anything to do with poverty. By shunning his past, he also shunned her. And this book is about gentrification and, kicking people out of their homes for the sake of progress, and what that means to traditional values and history. And they do also in this book talk about provincial discrimination. Okay, another book that I read, I finished this in December, is The Cabinet by Eun-soo Kim. It's hard when the names aren't romanized, or they're not written in Korean. I don't know how the romanization is unclear. Eun-soo Kim wrote one of his books is more famous. It's called The Plotters. I have it on my shelf. I haven't read it yet. But this one is about a curmudgeon office worker. It's very, now that I think about it, it's very much like The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, but less whimsical. This book follows an office worker who has been tasked to oversee a cabinet called Cabinet 13. And in this cabinet are files on these people called the symptomers. And they essentially are just regular human beings that have little quirks. Not like Boku no Hero Academia quirks, but like quirks like a man grows a ginkgo tree out of his pinky. Some of them fall asleep for years at a time. Some of them just disappear from time entirely for like a couple months, a couple years, and they come back and they're like, what happened? They lose time, the time skippers. When you're first reading it, none of these quirks really seem connected in any way. But the more that you read, the more that Eun-Soo Kim's perspective on modern society and Korean society specifically, how it's essentially ruined us, it becomes very apparent that capitalism is bad. One of the quotes that I remember is one of the lasting effects of capitalism is angst. It's a really good book. I think it was really interesting to read, and it was a really enjoyable reading experience. The chapters are pretty short. I've got about like 2 or 3 more books in this stack. I can get through them. The next book is The Disaster Tourist by Ko-Eun, and I read this also as part of the contest for the Literary Translation Institute. And the essay that I wrote won 2nd place. This book is about a woman who works at a tourism agency who sends tourists to locations that have been hit by disaster, like famine or flood or tornadoes. And essentially, she is harassed at work, sexually harassed at work. And so when she tries to bring it up with her superiors, they're like, what do you mean? No. So as a way to basically keep her quiet, they send her off on this business trip to a location that's about to be shut down, essentially, because it's just not selling well. People aren't enjoying their trip. And so she is going there undercover as a tourist to basically give her assessment to whether or not that they should shut down this package or if they should keep going. And while on the island, she meets all these people, and essentially she uncovers a plan to fabricate a natural disaster that will kill thousands of people, mostly for the purpose to bring tourists back. And so she's kind of caught between this potential to have more power or killing thousands of people for profit. It's a little convoluted what happens in the end. But this book is really about like ecotourism, voluntourism, and the devastating economical and environmental impacts of the tourism industry, and also how the tourism industry and global mass and rapid globalization have impacted impoverished communities. And it's a really good book. I wrote an entire essay on it. You can read it on my website. You can read it on my website. Oh my god, I have another book in the stack. I'm so sorry. I've been neglecting my tea. It's still warm, thank God. The last book I want to talk about is not really by it's not a Korean translated work, but it's by a Korean American that I read last year. And that's All You Can Ever Know by Nicole Chung. I work on a podcast. I will link it down below. But the podcast that I work with interviewed Nicole Chung. So I've known about her for a couple months, and I just never read her book, even though she is a Korean adoptee. And this book is her memoir, and it's all about her finding her birth parents. I actually read this also for the book club that I'm in for Fulbright Lotus. I made them read this for National Adoption Month in November. And as an adoptee, I think that it's really important that adoptee voices are told, because I think that the narrative surrounding adoption is very centered on adoptive parents and their journey, and it's not focused enough on adoptees processing the trauma that comes with being an adoptee. And I think I want to do another video on this about adoptee literature and adoptee voices and adoptee issues, because as an adoptee, it's really important to me. But Nicole, essentially, she is about to become a mother. She is pregnant, and suddenly she has, not suddenly, it's not unprovoked, but she decides to search for her birth family, because she knows that her story is very unique, that her birth family lives in America. So she had easier access. It's very interesting because she ends up meeting her family and she is hit with the realization that she has to reconcile the actual meeting of her family. There's no guidebook to what it's like to meet your birth parents or your blood family. And so this book basically talks about her journey as an adoptee, trying to find her parents, what that was like for her, and it was really, really interesting. I think this book is really important to read for people who may have preconceived notions about what it means to be adopted, and an adopted person, and what that means for us emotionally, and what it feels like to be torn away from a culture, and this balancing act of being not white enough, but not Asian enough, that a lot of Asian Americans feel, but for Asian American adoptees, it's really different, because I think that really inside we really don't feel that much different from like our white friends who grew up with white parents in a white community, blah, blah, blah. But unlike other Asian Americans, we don't have the language or the cultural heritage to back up our visual appearance. And I think that's, I wrote a blog post, I wrote a review on my website. Please check it out, where I talked about adoptee issues and Nicole Chung in this book. So that is all the books that I wanted to talk about today. This is a long, I've been filming for 36 minutes. I just think that it's really pretty. I think the Korean book covers are really pretty. Boop. So, isn't that exciting? It's been a long time, y'all, that I filmed a video of talking about books, and I just get really excited about books, and I think that the booktube community has really changed since I've been here last. I haven't stopped watching videos, I haven't stopped reading, I haven't stopped talking to my friends about books, but I'm hoping that this can be, I hope that I can keep making videos, talking about books, and being chill. Thank you for joining me if you've stuck around this long. Thanks. Thanks, bye.